You're watching Bronx.net Television and a Bronx.net Perspectives web exclusive as we're talking with Nancy Genova, the author of Death of a Dream, as we take a look at her play and her life during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And Nancy, as we're sharing a little bit, throughout the course of the show about your play, Death of a Dream, we know that it's based on personal experience. What was it in your mind that made you feel as though, because everybody, there are a lot of victims out there that they can tell their story. What was it in your mind that said, you know what, I know my story is going to go far?
I don't think that it was so much that I thought that the story would go far. I just thought that because I could bring it all together from the perspective of having been a victim and somebody that also worked in healthcare, that I wanted people to really get it. I wanted people, those that are practitioners, that are actually the service providers, sometimes grow very frustrated in their process of getting victims numerous resources, like let's say a domestic violence shelter and services in place, what we call concrete services, public assistance, food stamps and everything, and the victim then returns home. And I thought if people could enter her world and really understand where she's coming from, then they could meet her where she's at. And so then they would understand the process and really be able, that would give them the right tools and how to navigate her through that process and always be there for her so that she wouldn't feel judged and would feel safe to return. And I thought the same thing on the victim's end, that even when you've been victimized, that you could recognize that at some point you could get to the other side and that you really can survive the abuse, and not only can you survive it, that you could end up on the other side and thrive. It's more than just surviving it.
Can you truly say right now that you feel that you're on the other side, given the fact that you went through this, you survived it, and is it easy now for you to come out and tell your story?
It's still not easy to tell a story because the story was a process for me, and now I do feel that I'm on the other side, but that took a lengthy process. It was a long time. I had to go to therapy. I went to my spiritual counselor. I had to incorporate artistic forms of what we call multimodalities, like dance and writing and all these kinds of things to initially distract me from the depression and the grief that I had with letting go of the relationship, because I had been in that relationship a long time. And that was a process. I really didn't want to let go of the relationship. That's where the title comes from. It was like the death of a dream. And I grieved it. I grieved it because my dream was to live happily ever after. And I didn't want to let go of that. And so that for me was a process. And in that process, I've been able to become more secure in who I am and also begin to feel better. And so now I'm in a place where I feel like I'm Zen-like and a lot of things don't bother me, and I'm able to cope on a different level. And I know that I have much better boundaries because now things don't impact me or affect me the way they did. But that is a process. And with the women that I work with on a daily basis, I recognize that the initial process takes about 2 years, because think about it. She has to leave the home. She has to get on her feet. She has to get housing. She has to get services. She has to return to some form of school or training to get some skills to re-enter the workforce. And so that process in itself takes 2 years. But the scars of what has happened, that takes a lot longer.
What was the hardest process for you?
I think the hardest process for me was forgiving myself for having stayed so long, because there was a lot of shame with having done that, because I felt myself very capable and very competent, and yet I stayed. And so that for me created a situation where I was ashamed that I had stayed, and also why did I allow it? How had I become that person? And so for me to let go of that and recognize, and actually I had a very good spiritual counselor who actually affirmed me a lot and repeatedly told me that I was more than the abuse, and that the abuse had been part of my history, but it wasn't all that I was. And so that in itself was very empowering for me to hear, and I had to hear it many times before I ingrained it into my psyche and began to experience it and live it out in my personal life.
Was there ever a point where you said, you know what, looking back, how crazy was I, and how crazy was this whole thing?
Very, very little was devoted to that, because now I recognize that it was part of my journey and that it's part of my history, and it made me who I am today. So even though I would not have chosen that. I recognize that feel sorry about it, it would drain me and weaken me in my resolve. And so that it would make me feel like that was wasted. And no, it wasn't wasted, because now I'm utilizing what happened, and hopefully as I share the story, it will help other people as well. So maybe it was part of my journey.
All right, well, Nancy, we want to thank you for this web exclusive, and best wishes as you continue with Death of a Dream.
Thank you. Thank you
right.
so much for having me.